He had buried 2 people he loved and survived it by feeling nothing. He had built 400 acres with his bare hands and slept alone in it for 10 years. He had written 1 letter in his entire life, asking for something he actually needed, and the word he used was quiet. What stepped off that train was the opposite of quiet. She looked him dead in the eyes on that platform and said, "I think you wrote the wrong letter, Mr. Cole, because the life you're describing, I've seen it. I've watched men live it." She picked up her own bag. "It's not peace. It's just a longer way of being alone." Nathan Cole had one rule about his ranch. Everything had its place. The horses were fed at 5 in the morning. The cattle were moved at 7. The fences were checked before noon. The books were balanced every Sunday evening after supper. Everything ran on schedule, on order, on silence. That was how Nathan had survived 34 years in this world. Not by luck, not by charm, by control, by knowing exactly what was coming before it arrived. Which was why, when the train pulled into Silver Creek Station on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, Nathan was already standing at the platform, hat pulled low, arms folded, jaw set, 15 minutes early. He had a plan. The letter had been specific. He had written it himself, read it 3 times, sent it to a proper mail-order agency in Philadelphia, and waited. The letter said, "I am a rancher, 34 years old, financially stable. I own 400 acres in Silver Creek Valley, Montana. I am looking for a wife who values peace, quietness, and domestic responsibility. I am not a romantic man. I am a practical one. I need a partner for life, not a spectacle." 4 months later, the agency sent a reply. A woman had agreed to his terms. Her name was Charlotte Hayes, 25 years old, from Ohio. The agency described her as, and Nathan had read this line 4 separate times, calm, composed, and well-suited to a quiet Western life. Calm, composed, quiet. Nathan had practically exhaled with relief. He stood on that platform and told himself, "This will be fine. This will be exactly what I need." The train came around the bend, slowing, throwing a long cloud of smoke across the gray Montana sky. Nathan uncrossed his arms, straightened his hat, rolled his shoulders once. This will be fine. Yeah, he saw her before she stepped off the train. She was standing in the doorway of the passenger car, one hand braced against the frame, looking out at Silver Creek Valley like she was measuring it. Like she was deciding whether or not it was worth getting off the train for. Her posture was straight. Her dress was dark green, not the soft faded kind most women wore out west, but sharp, pressed with 2 clean buttons at the collar. Her hair was brown, pulled back, but one piece had come loose, and she did not seem bothered by it. Her eyes were moving, scanning, calculating. She looked like a woman who had questions already forming in her mind. Nathan's jaw tightened. The other passengers filed past her. She waited, not because she was afraid, not because she was shy. She was simply letting the crowd clear. Then, she stepped down from the train, picked up her own bag, didn't wait for a porter, didn't look around helplessly, and walked directly toward him. Not toward the station, not toward the town, toward him, like she had already figured out which one he was. Nathan didn't move. She stopped 2 feet in front of him, looked up. He was taller by nearly a foot, and smiled. Not the nervous smile he'd been expecting. Not the apologetic, hopeful, please think I'm suitable smile that he had quietly braced himself for. This was the smile of a woman who had already made her assessment and found the situation mildly entertaining. "Mr. Cole," she said. It was not a question. "Miss Hayes," he said back. She looked at him for 1 full second. "You look exactly like I thought you would." Nathan blinked. "Is that right?" She glanced at his hands, then back at his face. "You work your own fences?" "I do." "Good." She nodded once like that settled something. "So do I." He stared at her. "You work fences." "I grew up on a farm in Ohio, Mr. Cole. I have been working fences since I was 9 years old." She picked up her bag again. She had set it down briefly while she studied him and looked toward the road out of town. "Is that your wagon?" He turned. His wagon was hitched at the edge of the station lot. "It is," he said. "Then let's not waste daylight." And she walked toward it. Nathan stood on the platform for 3 full seconds before he followed her. The ride back to the ranch was 40 minutes of dirt road and open sky. Nathan drove. Charlotte sat beside him, her bag between her feet, watching the land roll by. He had expected silence. He got something different. "How many head of cattle?" she asked about 5 minutes in. "Currently 112. "That's a good number for 400 acres. You running them on the western pasture?" Nathan glanced at her. "How did you know about the western pasture?" "I asked about your land before I agreed to come." She said it simply, like it was obvious. "The agency had a few details. I also spoke with a woman in Philadelphia who had a cousin who worked for a rancher 2 valleys over from you. She gave me some general information about the terrain." He stared at the road ahead. "You researched me," he said. "Of course I did." She turned to look at him. "You were asking me to move 2,000 miles from everything I know, Mr. Cole. Did you expect me to simply arrive without doing my homework?" Nathan said nothing. "I researched you," she continued. "I know you own the land outright. I know you built the main house yourself in 1885. I know your ranch has been profitable for 3 consecutive years. I know Silver Creek had a bad winter in '87 that killed a third of the valley's livestock, and your operation survived it." She paused. "I also know that you have a reputation for working too hard and talking too little." Another pause. "That last part I gathered from the tone of your letter." Nathan's hands tightened on the reins. He said nothing. Charlotte looked back at the road. "It was a very precise letter," she said, and there was something almost gentle in her voice now. "I respected the honesty of it. You didn't pretend to be offering something romantic. You were straightforward." "I try to be," Nathan said. "I appreciate that." She folded her hands in her lap. "I hope you can appreciate the same quality in me." He looked at her. She was already looking forward. "I have a feeling," he said slowly, "that what you call straightforward and what I call straightforward may be 2 very different things." Charlotte smiled, just slightly. "Now," she said, "you're starting to understand." They reached the ranch just before sunset. Nathan helped her down from the wagon. She allowed that much, though he got the impression she would have managed perfectly well without him, and she stood in front of the main house and looked at it. He watched her face. He had built that house with his own hands. Every board, every window frame, every stone in the fireplace. It wasn't large, but it was solid. It was real. It had taken him 2 years. He told himself he did not care what she thought of it. He was watching her face anyway. She walked toward it slowly, put her hand on the doorframe, looked up at the roofline. "You built this yourself," she said. "I did." "The joinery on the corner beams is good work." She turned to look at him. "My father was a carpenter. I know good joinery." Nathan did not know what to say to that. He said, "I'll show you the kitchen." She said, "I'll find it." And she walked inside. "Bachonye." He gave her the larger of the 2 bedrooms. He had intended to from the beginning. He slept in the smaller one, and had for years. The larger one had simply accumulated boxes and old equipment, and he had spent the better part of a Sunday clearing it out and putting in a proper bed frame, a dresser, and a washstand. When she saw it, she was quiet for a moment. Then, "You prepared this room. The agency said you'd be arriving in September. I had time." She looked at the washstand, at the dresser, at the clean window with the curtain he had, and he had not told anyone this, and he would deny it under oath, actually gone into town and purchased rather than leaving the window bare. "This is thoughtful," she said. "It's practical," Nathan said immediately. She looked at him. "Of course," she said, the faint smile again. He left her to settle in. He went to the barn, checked on the horses, stood in the quiet dark for about 10 minutes, and tried to figure out what had just happened to his life. The first morning he woke at 5. He was at the kitchen table with coffee by 5:15. He expected the house to be silent for another 2 hours at least. Instead, at 5:22, Charlotte walked into the kitchen, fully dressed, already wearing her work boots. She looked at the coffee, looked at him and said, "Is there a second cup?" He was so surprised he actually stood up. "You don't need to. I wasn't expecting a second cup," she said with patience. "Do you have one?" He found one. She poured her own coffee, sat down across from him, wrapped both hands around the mug, and looked out the window at the dark morning. "What time do the hands arrive?" she asked. 7. "And you start without them?" "Always." She nodded. "Then we should be out by 5:30. Nathan set down his cup. "Miss Hayes." "Charlotte," she said. "Charlotte." He stopped. "You don't need to work the ranch. That is not what—" "I know what the letter said." She looked at him directly. "It said you wanted a quiet wife who would manage the home. I intend to manage the home. I will cook. I will clean. I will keep this house in order." A pause. "But I am not going to sit inside for 12 hours while everything I could be helping with happens 40 feet away. That's not who I am, Mr. Cole. And if the agency told you it was they were wrong." Nathan looked at her. She looked back at him. "Nathan," he said finally. She raised an eyebrow. "If we're going to be married," he said, "you can call me Nathan." For the first time, her smile reached her eyes. "Well then, Nathan," she said, standing up and taking her coffee with her. "Let's not waste daylight." It was the second time she'd said those words. He had a feeling it was going to be a recurring theme. The ranch hands arrived at 7. There were 3 of them men. Nathan had worked with for years. Hector, who was 40-something and had ridden cattle drives since before Nathan was born. Pete, who was 20 and still learning but worked hard. And old Cal, who was 63 and half-deaf, but knew the land better than anyone alive. All 3 stopped dead when they saw Charlotte walking back from the north pasture with Nathan carrying a length of rope she'd found with a broken splice and was already rebraiding without looking at her hands. Hector took off his hat. Pete's mouth opened. Cal squinted. "That your wife?" "My wife." Nathan confirmed. "She's rebraiding rope," Pete said. "I can see that," Nathan said. "She didn't even look at her hands." "I noticed." Charlotte reached them, looked at the 3 men, and held out the rebraided rope. "The splice on this was compromised about 8 inches from the end. You'll want to check the rest of the coils in the barn. If one has gone like this, others might have too." The 3 men looked at each other. Then Hector took the rope, looked at the splice, and whistled low. "Clean work," he said. Charlotte said, "Thank you. I'm Charlotte. It's good to meet you." She handed Nathan his coffee. She had brought him a second cup. He hadn't even asked, hadn't even noticed she'd gone back for it, and walked toward the barn. The 4 men watched her go. Cal cleared his throat. "Nathan," he said. "Don't," Nathan said. "I was just going to say, don't." Cal put his hat back on and grinned under his beard. By the end of the first week, Charlotte had reorganized the kitchen in a way that Nathan had to admit made significantly more sense than how he'd had it. She had identified 3 fence posts on the eastern line that were rotting at the base and were going to fail before the first snow. She had started a kitchen garden in the patch behind the house that had been empty and weeded over since Nathan bought the property. She had also on Thursday evening made beef stew that was so good that Pete literally asked if he could have the recipe to send to his mother. Charlotte wrote it out for him without blinking. Nathan, eating his second bowl, told himself this was all simply practical. This was an efficient arrangement. He was not. He was absolutely not beginning to look forward to coming in from the fields. That would be illogical. On Friday evening, he came in at dusk to find Charlotte at the kitchen table with the ranch's ledger books open in front of her. He stopped. "What are you doing?" She looked up. "Looking at your accounts." He crossed the room in 3 steps. "Those are private. You have an accounting error in March of this year." She pointed to a row. Your cattle feed costs don't align with the supplier invoices in this folder. She held up a folder. You overpaid by about $34. You should write to the supplier. Nathan looked at the ledger, then at the folder, then at her. You found my accounting files, he said. They were on the shelf above the ledger. It seemed like they belonged together. She tilted her head. Do you want me to put them back separately? He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He looked at the numbers. She was right. How did you know to check? He asked. The March totals didn't match the February pattern. Your costs should track seasonally. A jump that size in 1 month caught my attention. She paused. My father also kept accounts. I grew up watching him balance books. I have a sense for when numbers don't fit. Nathan sat back. He looked at this woman across his kitchen table. This woman who woke before sunrise, who fixed rope splices without looking at her hands, who organized his kitchen, who planned a garden, who found his accounting error, who cooked stew that made a 20-year-old boy think of his mother, who had told him on the very first day that she was the wrong woman for the job. You said, he started. She looked at him. The first day, at the station. He chose his words. You said I ordered the wrong woman. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. I did say that. Did you mean it? She looked at him steadily. I meant that I knew your letter was looking for someone different than me. Someone softer, maybe. Someone who needed more from the arrangement than I do. And what do you need from the arrangement? She thought about this. Genuinely thought about it. He could see her considering. Honesty, she said finally. Fairness. Work that means something. And, she paused, to be treated as though I am actually present, not as furniture in someone's house. Nathan said nothing. What did you need? She asked. He looked at the ledger. Peace, he said. Peace. She considered this. And have I? She stopped herself. Has this week been peaceful? He looked up. He thought about the mornings, about coffee at 5:22, about her voice asking questions across the breakfast table, about the sounds of someone else moving through the house at the end of the day, about coming in from the fields and finding the lamp already lit. It's been different, he said. She searched his face. Is different acceptable? She asked. He picked up the ledger. I'll write to the supplier Monday. Charlotte looked down at the page, and something very small, something that might have been the beginning of something, moved in the space between them. The trouble started in the second week. It came in the form of Martha Dempsey. Martha Dempsey was the wife of the largest neighboring ranch owner, a woman who had been the unquestioned social authority of Silver Creek Valley for 15 years. And a person who had, in Nathan's quiet estimation, never once in her life said anything useful. She arrived on a Wednesday morning with 2 other women from town. He did not know their names, he generally did not, and she brought a cake. Charlotte came to the door. Nathan, working near the barn, could see the whole thing. He watched Charlotte smile. Invite them in. Thank them for the cake. He went back to work. About 40 minutes later, Charlotte came out of the house and walked straight to where he was working. Her chin was up, her jaw was set. Her eyes had something in them that was not anger exactly, was more controlled than anger. I need a moment, she said. Take it, he said. She stood beside the fence and breathed. He kept working. After a while she said, Mrs. Dempsey thinks I'm going to be a problem. I could have told you that, he said. She said that a wife who works beside the ranch hands will confuse the natural order of the household. Charlotte's voice was very even. She also said, and I want you to hear this directly, that if I cannot manage to behave like a proper rancher's wife, the other families in the valley will find it difficult to include us in their social arrangements. Nathan stopped working. He turned to look at her. What did you say? He asked. Charlotte looked at him. I thanked her for the cake, she said, and I told her I was sure we would all find a way to get along. A pause. And then I showed her the kitchen garden. The corner of her mouth moved. I may have mentioned that I expected a very productive harvest, and that I planned to supply several of the town's families with fresh vegetables come fall. Nathan stared at her. You turned it into a business offer, he said. I turned it into a reason for her to want me successful. She shrugged one shoulder. Martha Dempsey runs the church committee that distributes food to the valley's struggling families each fall. Fresh vegetables from our garden would make her look very generous. He looked at her for a long time. You did all of that, he said in 40 minutes. I had a difficult mother, Charlotte said simply. I learned early. And she walked back toward the house. Nathan stood at the fence and thought about the word peace, about what it actually meant. He'd always believed peace was the absence of noise. But watching Charlotte walk back through the door of his house, watching the way she carried herself straight, sure deliberate, he started to wonder for the first time in a long time if maybe he'd had the definition wrong. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in the narrow bed in his small room and stared at the ceiling and listened to the silence of the house. Not quite silence, actually. From the other end of the hall, the faint sound of a page turning. She was reading. He had not known she read at night. He had not known she went to sleep late. He had not known 3 weeks ago that a woman like this existed. He put his arm over his eyes. Get control of yourself, Cole. This is a practical arrangement. This is what you needed. He lay there for another hour. The page turned again. And Nathan Cole, a man who had spent a decade building walls out of silence and solitude and the very specific belief that needing someone was the first step toward losing everything, lay in the dark and felt something in his chest that he had no good word for. Something that felt uncomfortably like looking forward to tomorrow morning, and 5:22, and a second cup. On Saturday, Marcus Whitmore came to the ranch. Nathan knew Marcus Whitmore. Everyone in the valley knew Marcus Whitmore. He owned the largest operation in the county, 800 acres, 200 head of house that was more mansion than ranch. He was 50, silver-haired, and had the particular brand of confidence that came from never once in his adult life having to wonder whether he could afford something. He arrived in a carriage. Nathan met him outside. Cole. Whitmore climbed down, looked around the property with the slow assessor's gaze of a man who was thinking about ownership. Heard you brought yourself a wife. I did. Mail order. That's my business, Marcus. Whitmore smiled, the kind of smile that was really a statement. Just making conversation. How's the northern pasture holding up? I know you've been worried about the water table since spring. Nathan had not told Whitmore about the water table worry, which meant Whitmore had sources. The pasture is fine, Nathan said. Good, good. Whitmore put his hands in his coat pockets. You know, if things ever get stretched out here, droughts can be hard on a small operation. I've always said my door is open. We could work something out regarding the land. My land is not available, Nathan said. Nothing's ever final, Cole. Whitmore glanced at the house. Is the new Mrs. Cole inside? I'd love to extend my compliments. She's busy, Nathan said. Perhaps another time. Whitmore climbed back into the carriage. You think about what I said. About the land. He drove away. Nathan stood in the yard and watched him go and felt the old, cold, familiar weight of it. The knowledge that this land, this life, this thing he'd built was always one bad season away from becoming someone else's property. He was still standing there when Charlotte appeared beside him. He hadn't heard her come out. Who was that? She asked. Marcus Whitmore. He owns the big operation east of us. What did he want? Nathan watched the dust from the carriage settle. He wants to buy my land. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. And you told him no? I told him no. Good. She stood beside him, both of them looking at the road where Whitmore had gone. He'll come back. I know. Men like that always come back. She folded her arms across her chest. My father had a neighbor like that. Came every year with a better offer. Every year my father said no. What happened? My father kept his farm until the day he died. She looked up at Nathan. and the neighbor had to find somewhere else to put his ambitions. Nathan said nothing. "This land is yours," Charlotte said. Matter of fact, simple, like she was stating the location of the sun. "You built it. You're going to keep it." He looked at her. "You don't know what this year's water situation might mean," he said. "No, but I know what giving up means." She met his eyes. "And I don't think you do either, or you would have done it already." The wind came across the pasture. Nathan looked at his land, at 400 acres of Montana, at the fence lines and the pasture and the house with the kitchen garden starting to take shape, and the barn where 3 good horses stood, and the whole complicated living structure of a life he had built from nothing. "No," he said quietly. "I don't know how to do that." Charlotte nodded once, like that was the answer she already knew. "Then we won't," she said, and she went back inside to start the evening meal. Nathan stood in the yard for another long moment, and the word "we" stayed with him long after everything else had gone quiet. That night, he sat at the kitchen table after supper and watched her clear the dishes, and he tried to understand what was happening to him. He had sent for a quiet woman. He had sent for someone who would be, and he felt the shame of it now more clearly than before, essentially invisible. Present, but not present. Useful, but not demanding. Comforting in the way that a fire is comforting something that keeps the cold out without requiring you to talk to it. What he had gotten instead was Charlotte Hayes, who rebraided rope without looking, who found accounting errors, who handled Martha Dempsey with the tactical precision of a general, who said "we" and meant it, who read at night until late and turned pages so quietly he almost couldn't hear it, and somehow that sound was the most peaceful sound he'd fallen asleep to in years. "You're staring," she said without turning around from the wash basin. "I'm thinking," he said. "About what?" He looked at the table. "About whether I asked for the right thing." She turned around at that, looked at him. "The letter," he said. "What I wrote, what I thought I wanted." He rubbed his hand across the back of his neck. "I've been wondering if I was wrong." Charlotte dried her hands on the towel slowly. "About what specifically? About what peace looks like?" He met her eyes. "I thought it meant quiet. I thought it meant a house where nothing unexpected happened." She waited. "But this week," he said carefully, "the house hasn't been quiet, and something unexpected has happened every single day." He paused. "And I have slept better this week than I have in 2 years." Charlotte was very still. "I don't know what to do with that information," he said honestly. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Neither do I." And she set the towel down on the counter. "But I think," she said, "that maybe we don't need to decide what to do with it tonight." She took her lamp from the side table. "Good night, Nathan." "Good night, Charlotte." She went down the hall. The page would turn in a little while. He would lie in his narrow bed and stare at the ceiling. And for the first time in a very long time, Nathan Cole did not feel like a man living alone. He felt like a man who was against every plan he'd made and every wall he'd built, right on the edge of something beginning. He did not know what to call it yet, but he was no longer sure he wanted to stop it. The second week began with a letter. Nathan found it on the kitchen table when he came in from the morning rounds, propped against the salt shaker, already opened, which meant Charlotte had received it first and read it before he woke up. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, still in his coat, and looked at the envelope. "That came on yesterday's postwriter," Charlotte said. She was at the stove, her back to him. "I signed for it. The name on it was Cole Ranch, so I assumed it wasn't private." Nathan picked it up. He read it once. Then again. His jaw tightened. "What is it?" Charlotte asked. She hadn't turned around, but somehow she already knew from the silence that it wasn't good. "It's from the bank in Billings," he said. "They're calling in a portion of the operating loan. Early." Now she turned. "How much?" $400, due in 60 days. She was quiet. He watched her do the math the same way he was doing it, quickly, without paper in her head. running the numbers against what she already knew about the operation. "That's tight," she said. "That's tight," he agreed. "Can you cover it? If the fall sale goes well." He set the letter down. If. What does if mean specifically? He pulled out the chair and sat down. Told her everything: the water table issue in the northern pasture affecting the grazing quality, the cattle lighter than he needed them, what lighter animals sold for. The full picture, the way he hadn't planned to tell anyone, the way he normally carried it alone. Charlotte listened without interrupting. When he finished, she sat down across from him. "Show me the projections," she said. "Charlotte, show me the numbers, Nathan." She held his gaze. "I am not going to stand in this kitchen and watch you carry this alone when I can see the ledger just as clearly as you can." He looked at her for a moment. Then he got up and retrieved the ledger from the shelf. They worked at the kitchen table for 2 hours, side by side. Charlotte with a pencil, Nathan reading figures aloud. She caught 2 calculation errors, small ones, but they added up. And by the time they were finished, they had a revised set of projections and 3 possible paths forward. It wasn't a solution, but it was a map. "You didn't have to do this," Nathan said. Charlotte set down her pencil. "Yes, I did. This isn't in the arrangement. I know what the arrangement said." She looked at him directly. "But I am not living inside a letter anymore, Nathan. I am living inside this ranch. And this ranch is in trouble. So I am going to help fix it." A pause. "Unless you are going to tell me you don't want my help." He didn't say that, because it wasn't true. And they both knew it. She picked up the pencil again. "Now, tell me about these cattle. What do they need between now and October to put weight on them before the sale?" Nathan told her, and they worked until noon. The thing about Charlotte, the thing Nathan was only beginning to understand in that second week, was that she didn't help the way most people helped. She didn't offer sympathy first and assistance second. She went straight to the problem. It was only afterward, once the problem was dealt with, that you realized she had been paying attention to how you felt about it the whole time. He noticed it first on a Wednesday afternoon. They were moving cattle in the eastern pasture. At some point, Nathan's horse spooked sideways, and he had to wrench the reins hard to correct. When the moment passed, Charlotte was right beside him. She hadn't pulled back. She had simply matched his movement, closed the gap, and kept the cattle from scattering. "You all right?" she asked. "Fine," he said. "Your left shoulder," she said. "You pulled it." "It's nothing." "You're holding your arm differently." He was. He hadn't even noticed it yet. "How did you?" he started. "My older brother used to do the same thing," she said. "Wrench the reins left-handed and then carry his whole arm like a dead wing for 3 days and insist he was fine." She kept her eyes on the cattle. "You'll want to put heat on it tonight, not cold, heat." He said nothing, because there was nothing to say. She had noticed something about him before he'd voiced it. He tried to remember the last time anyone had done that. He couldn't. That evening at supper, he put heat on his shoulder without telling her. He caught her noticing. She didn't say anything. She just added another half ladle of stew to his bowl without being asked. Small, quiet, real. He was in serious trouble, and he knew it. Not the financial kind. The other kind. The kind that crept up on a man who had spent a decade being very careful not to need anyone. The trouble with the town arrived that same week. It came in the form of Martha Dempsey at the general store on Thursday. Nathan had sent Charlotte in for flour and salt while he dealt with the feed supplier across the street. He heard about it from Pete, who had been outside and caught raised voices through the open window. "What kind of raised voices?" Nathan asked. Pete looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Dempsey kind mostly. Your wife mostly just answered real quiet." He paused. "But the kind of quiet that's louder than yelling, if you know what I mean." Nathan went to find Charlotte. She was loading the wagon. Her movements were controlled and precise, and just a little too contained. "What happened?" he asked. "Nothing worth repeating," she said. "Pete says." Martha Dempsey made some comments in the store about the appropriate roles of wives in established Valley families. Charlotte set a bag of flour in the wagon with more force than the bag required. She seemed to feel that a wife who works cattle is setting a poor example for the younger women of Silver Creek. "And what did you say?" "I said that I thought the younger women of Silver Creek were capable of deciding for themselves what kind of example was useful to them." She put the last package in the wagon. "And then I paid for my goods and left." "Charlotte?" "I did not raise my voice," she said. "I did not make a scene. I was perfectly polite." She turned to face him. Her expression was steady, but her eyes were working hard. "But Nathan, I need you to understand something." "Tell me." "I am not going to apologize for who I am," she said. "I am not going to make myself smaller to satisfy a woman who has never worked a day in her life for anything she owns." Her voice was even, but the heat underneath it was real. "I will be respectful. I will be every version of decent asked of me in this community. But I will not pretend I am something I'm not. Not for Martha Dempsey. Not for anyone." A pause. "Including you." Those two words landed differently than the rest. Nathan looked at her. "I never asked you to," he said. She searched his face. "No," she said slowly. "You haven't." Something shifted. "That surprises me, actually." "Why?" "Because most men who wrote the letter you wrote would be embarrassed by all of this. The way I talk, the way I work, the way I handled Mrs. Dempsey." She paused. "Are you—" He thought about it honestly, made himself actually consider it. "No," he said. "Not at all. I am not going to tell you I don't notice it," he said. "People talk in a small valley. I notice it." He met her eyes. "But embarrassed isn't the right word. I've been trying to find the right word for 3 days. And—" he looked away, then back. "Unprepared," he said. "I was unprepared for you. That's different from embarrassed." Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. "That might be the most honest thing you've said to me," she said. "I try not to lie," he said. "I know." She turned back to the wagon. "You are genuinely honest, Nathan, even when it's uncomfortable for you." She climbed up to the seat. "I find that very rare." He climbed up beside her. They drove back to the ranch in the kind of quiet that wasn't empty anymore, the kind that had weight and warmth in it, the kind that didn't need filling. For the first time in his life, Nathan Cole understood the difference between the two. A visitor came on Saturday that neither of them had expected. Annie Coulter was young, maybe 19-20, wrapped in a coat that wasn't heavy enough for the weather, with a child on her hip no older than 18 months. She stood at the end of Nathan's road for 10 minutes before she walked up to the door. Charlotte saw her from the window and went out herself rather than waiting. Nathan came in from the barn to find Charlotte already in quiet conversation with the young woman on the porch. He stopped, read Charlotte's face across the yard. In her expression he saw a request and a question and a small warning all at once. "Nathan," Charlotte said. "This is Mrs. Annie Coulter. She lives at the Coulter homestead about 6 miles east." Nathan had heard of the Coulter place. Hardscrabble little homestead. The husband had come out 3 years back from somewhere in the east with big ideas and not enough experience. "Jim's had an accident," Charlotte said. "He came off a horse 2 days ago. Broken leg. They've had no way to get to town." A pause. "And they have no food in the house past tonight." Nathan looked at the young woman, at the child on her hip, at the coat that wasn't warm enough. He looked at Charlotte. He understood what she was asking without asking. He also understood this was the kind of moment that showed a man who he actually was, versus who he told himself he was. "Hector," Nathan called toward the barn. "Can you hitch the second wagon?" Charlotte's expression changed. Just slightly. Just around the eyes. "We'll load what we can spare," Nathan said to Annie Coulter. "Enough for 2 weeks. I'll send Pete out tomorrow to look at the leg. He's had doctoring experience on the trail." He looked at Charlotte. "What else?" "Firewood," she said quietly. "Firewood too," he said to Hector. Annie Coulter pressed her free hand over her mouth. The child on her hip made a grab for her coat button, oblivious. "You don't need to," Annie started. "I do," Nathan said simply. "That's what neighbors are for." Charlotte looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen before. Not surprise exactly, more like confirmation. Like watching a thing you hoped was true prove itself true. They loaded the wagon together. Charlotte added 2 jars of preserved vegetables from the kitchen without being asked. Nathan added firewood until the wagon bed was full. After Hector drove Annie east, Nathan and Charlotte stood in the yard and watched the wagon go. "She almost didn't come," Charlotte said. "I know. She stood at the end of your road for 10 minutes before she walked up." Charlotte watched until the wagon was out of sight. "I saw her from the window." "Pride is a hard thing," Nathan said. "Needing help and having to ask for it." He said it simply, without drama. But Charlotte turned to look at him, and he knew she understood exactly who else he was talking about. "Yes," she said. "It is." They went inside. That night Nathan did not sleep well. Not because of Annie Coulter, not because of the bank, not because of Whitmore's name sitting in the back of his mind since the man's last visit. He didn't sleep because of what he heard at 11 o'clock coming from the kitchen. Not a sound that alarmed him. Just a voice. Charlotte's voice. Low and careful. The specific tone of someone trying not to be heard. He lay still for a moment. Then he got up. He stopped in the hallway just outside the kitchen doorway. Charlotte was at the table with a single lamp and a piece of paper in front of her, her hand pressed flat against it. She was not writing. She was not reading. She was sitting perfectly still, and she was saying something very quietly. He caught 3 words. "I know Mama." Nathan did not move. He understood immediately. A letter. From Ohio. From someone who had known her before Montana, before the green dress and the train and the suitcase carried without help. He understood something else immediately, too. Charlotte Hayes, who had handled Martha Dempsey without blinking, who had told Whitmore exactly what his plan was in 30 seconds, was sitting alone in a kitchen at 11 at night talking to a letter from a dead woman. Because her mother had been dead for 3 years. He had known that. She had told him, briefly, cleanly, without performance. He had filed it and moved on. He had not thought about what it meant to be 25 years old and 2,000 miles from everything familiar sitting across the table every day from a man who was still learning to look at her like she was actually there. He stood in the hallway. He should go back to bed. He should give her the privacy she had clearly arranged for herself by waiting until the house was quiet. He went into the kitchen. Charlotte's head came up fast. Her hand moved the letter under the table in one smooth motion, not hiding it, just composing herself. The gap in her composure lasted exactly 1 second, and then it was gone. "Nathan," she said, perfectly even. "I didn't wake you." "No," he said. He went to the stove, put the kettle on, said nothing. She watched him. "You don't have to," she started. "I know," he said. He stood at the stove with his back to her while the kettle heated. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the Montana dark sat against the windows, heavy and complete. "She would have liked it here," Charlotte said finally. He didn't turn around. "Your mother?" "Yes." A pause. "She always said Ohio was too flat, that a person needed something to look at in the distance, or your thoughts had nowhere to go." Her voice was steady, but not all the way steady. "She never got further west than Indiana." The kettle began to move. "I'm sorry," Nathan said. He meant it differently than the first time he'd said it briefly in the barn and moved on. He meant it in the fuller way. The way that acknowledged not just the fact of loss, but the specific weight of carrying it alone in a new place. He understood that weight. He had his own version of it. He poured 2 cups and put one in front of Charlotte and sat down across from her. She looked at the cup, then at him. "You're up at 11 o'clock making tea." "I am," he confirmed. She looked at the cup for a moment longer. Then she said, "She wrote me a letter before I left Ohio. Told me to read it when I got settled." She smoothed the edge of the paper. "I kept waiting until I felt settled enough." "And tonight," he said. She looked up. "Tonight, I think I'm starting to feel settled." The lamp held steady between them. Nathan looked at this woman across his kitchen table and felt something move in his chest that was not comfortable and not unfamiliar and not something he was going to be able to keep calling practical for very much longer. "What did she say?" he asked. "In the letter." Charlotte looked at him for a moment like she was deciding something. Then she picked up the letter from her lap. She read him one line. Just one. "Find someone worth building something with, Charlotte, and then build it like you mean to stay." Nathan said nothing. Charlotte folded the letter. They drank their tea in a silence that had warmth in it and did not need filling. When Charlotte stood to go back to bed, she paused at the doorway. "Nathan," she said. "Yes." "Thank you." Simply, directly, the way she did everything. "For the tea," he said. A pause. "For the tea." She agreed. She went down the hall. Nathan sat alone at the kitchen table for a while longer, with the lamp burning, and one line from a dead woman's letter sitting in the middle of his chest, like something that had been waiting a long time to land. "Build it like you mean to stay." He looked at the kitchen. At the organized shelves, and the garden notes on the windowsill, and the 2 cups on the table. He thought somebody already has. He went to bed, and fell asleep faster than he had in years. The letter from Douglas came on a Friday, 9 days after the meeting. Charlotte had said end of next week, and it arrived on Friday, which meant she had been right about that too. Nathan read it at the kitchen table. Charlotte was across from him. He slid it to her without being asked. She read it. Set it down. Still low, but better. He moved up about $60. She looked up. "Don't respond immediately. Wait 4 days." 4 days, he said. "If you respond tomorrow, he'll think he has you. 4 days says you're considering other options, even if you aren't." Nathan looked at her. "Are you sure about this?" "My father sold livestock for 20 years, she said. "I sat at that table my whole childhood." She picked up the letter again. "Douglas wants these cattle. He wouldn't keep coming back if he didn't. Make him want them badly enough to come up to a fair price." "And what's fair?" She named a number. He blinked. "That's $10 more than my own projection. Your projection accounted for the weight issue. Mine accounts for the quality of the bloodline." She set the letter down. "Your cattle have better blood than Douglas's herd, and he knows it. That's worth $10. He looked at her for a long moment. "Charlotte," he said. "Yes." "I asked for a quiet wife," he said. She smiled. Just slightly. "I know." "I was wrong," he said. The smile deepened. "I know that too." He looked away out the window and worked on not letting his face do whatever it was trying to do. 4 days, he said. 4 days, she confirmed. He waited 4 days. Douglas came up to Charlotte's number on the second revision. Nathan accepted. That evening he sat down at the kitchen table and did the math. With the cattle sale proceeds, the bank payment was covered. The 60-day crisis was over. The ranch was stable. He sat with that for a long moment. Then he looked at Charlotte across the table. She was mending something needle and thread, moving with the same efficient competence she brought to everything, and he said quietly, "Thank you." She looked up. "The Douglas negotiation," he said. "The bank extension. The accounting errors." He held her gaze. "Thank you." Charlotte put the mending down. She looked at him the way she sometimes did when he said something she hadn't expected, with that careful, open, considering expression that he had spent the first weeks resisting and had long since stopped trying to resist. "You're welcome," she said, simple, real, not making more of it than it was. He nodded once. She picked up the mending. The lamplight was soft on the table between them. Outside, the Montana wind was starting low and long across the fields. Winter was coming. You could feel it in the dark. Inside the ranch house, it was warm. Nathan sat with his ledger, and Charlotte sat with her mending, and neither of them said anything for a long time. But the silence between them now was nothing like the silence of the first morning. This was the silence of two people who had begun to understand each other, who had fought and been honest about it, who had needed each other and admitted it, who had, in the course of one extraordinary, complicated, nothing like what he planned month, become something neither of them had a clean word for yet. Not just an arrangement, not quite a marriage in the full sense of the word. Something still becoming. Something that had taken two people completely by surprise, one quiet admission at a time. Nathan closed the ledger. Charlotte bit the thread and knotted it off. The wind picked up outside, and inside the house that Nathan Cole had built with his own hands on the edge of the Montana Valley, the lamp stayed lit and the warmth stayed in, and neither of them was alone in it. Which was, he thought, more than he had asked for, and far, far more than he had deserved. The first snow came early that year. Not the killing kind, not yet, but enough to put a warning in the air. Nathan felt it the morning he walked outside, and the ground had that particular hollow sound under his boots, frozen just at the surface, brittle in a way that meant the cold had arrived ahead of schedule and intended to stay. He stood in the yard for a moment and listened to the quiet. Then Charlotte came out behind him, already in her coat, already holding 2 cups of coffee, and handed him one without a word. He took it. They stood side by side in the cold and looked at the sky. "Early," she said. 2 weeks, maybe 3, he said. "Before it gets serious. Then we have work to do." "We do." She went back inside to start breakfast. Nathan held his cup and thought about the word "we" again. How it had become the natural word now. How it had stopped sounding strange somewhere in the second month and started sounding like the most obvious thing in the world. He wasn't sure when exactly that had happened. He suspected it had happened gradually, not in a single moment, but in 100 small ones, stacked on top of each other, until the weight of them changed the shape of everything. He went inside. Hector arrived with news that the water trough in the north pasture had iced over overnight, and 2 of the younger steers were behaving oddly. Charlotte looked up from the stove when she heard that. "Stressed how?" she asked Hector. Hector, who had by this point fully stopped being surprised by anything Charlotte said or did, answered her directly. "Standing apart from the herd, not eating this morning." She looked at Nathan. "Could be the beginning of something respiratory. This temperature change was fast." "I'll look at them after breakfast," Nathan said. "I'll come with you," Charlotte said. Hector kept a perfectly straight face. Pete, pouring coffee in the corner, also kept a perfectly straight face, which required considerably more effort. Nathan said, "Fine." And they ate and went out together, and Charlotte was right. Early signs caught fast manageable. They moved the animals to the warmer section of the barn, and Charlotte mixed a remedy from her bag of supplies, something her father had taught her. And they worked side by side in the cold, with the steam of their breath between them. "How do you know all this?" Nathan asked at one point. "Genuinely. My father had cattle horses and 3 children," Charlotte said. "When you're the oldest and you're paying attention, you learn what's worth knowing." "Your father sounds like a thorough man," Nathan said. She was quiet for a moment. "He was," she said. "He died 2 years ago." Nathan stopped. "I'm sorry," he said. "Thank you." She kept her eyes on what she was doing. "He would have liked this," she added quietly. "The ranch, the work." A pause. "And probably you. He had very little patience for men who weren't serious about their land. You'd have gotten his respect." She glanced sideways at Nathan, which wasn't easily given. Nathan looked at her for a moment. "Neither is mine," he said. She met his eyes briefly, then looked back at her work, and he looked back at his. And the conversation was over, But the thing underneath it was still very much alive, warm and deliberate, and growing right there in that cold barn on the first frozen morning of the Montana winter. The serious trouble arrived on a Thursday, which was also, coincidentally, the day Marcus Whitmore made his second appearance. Nathan was in the barn when he heard the carriage. He came outside and found Charlotte already standing at the front of the house, and Whitmore already climbing down with that particular smile, and between them, standing like a man who had been positioning himself on this road for some time, was a figure Nathan hadn't expected. Gerald Marsh, president of the bank in Billings. A man who had never once come to Silver Creek in person in all the years Nathan had done business with his institution. He was making the trip now. "Nathan?" Whitmore extended his hand. "Hope you don't mind us coming by together. Gerald happened to be in the territory on some other business." "Happened to be," Nathan said. Marsh, a small man with carefully managed hair and an expression of practiced reasonableness, nodded. "Mr. Cole, thank you for receiving us. I haven't invited you in yet," Nathan said. Whitmore laughed the way men laugh when something isn't funny, but they need it to be. "Nathan, there's no reason for this to be uncomfortable. Gerald and I simply wanted to have a frank conversation about some options." "What options?" Nathan said. He felt Charlotte come up beside him, just slightly behind his left shoulder. Present. He didn't look at her. Didn't need to. Marsh opened his briefcase. "Mr. Cole, your operating loan extension was granted on the strength of your cattle sale proceeds. However, as you know, the broader economic climate is facing some challenges. Several banks have been asked to tighten their lending requirements." A pause. "The Billings branch will be required to call in any outstanding balances on accounts that fall below our new security threshold within 90 days. Nathan felt the ground shift slightly under his feet. His face didn't move. "What balance are you referring to?" Marsh named a number, not the operating loan. The original land note, a debt Nathan had taken on 9 years ago to purchase the final 100 acres. He had been paying it down steadily. 3 years from paying it off entirely. The remaining balance was substantial. "You're calling in the land note," Nathan said. "We are." Marsh's expression was apologetic in the specific way of a man who is not actually sorry. "I understand the timing is—" "Marcus," Charlotte said. Both men looked at her. It was the first time she had spoken since they arrived. She had been standing quietly, and they had, in the way of certain men in that era, essentially edited her out of the conversation. Her voice saying Whitmore's first name was not loud, but it stopped the room. "This was your idea," she said to Whitmore. Whitmore blinked. "Mrs. Cole, this is a banking matter." "You spoke with Mr. Marsh before this visit," she said. "You suggested this approach." She wasn't asking. "The bank calling the note creates pressure Nathan can't resolve quickly, which means he either sells to you at whatever price you name or the bank takes the land." She tilted her head. "That's the plan." The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. 4 of the loudest seconds Nathan could remember. Whitmore spread his hands. "Mrs. Cole, I understand this feels—" "How long?" Nathan said. He was looking at Marsh now, not Whitmore. 90 days, you said." 90 days from today," Marsh said. "And if I pay the remaining balance in full within 90 days, the note is cleared." "That is correct. But the amount—" "I know the amount," Nathan said. "I've known it for 9 years. Whitmore shifted. "Nathan, my offer for the property is fair. More than fair given the current—" "I know what your offer is," Nathan said. "And I know what this land is worth." He looked at Whitmore directly. "I built everything on this property with my own hands. I carried every fence post. I dug the wells. I built the barn. I built that house." He paused. "I'm not selling it." Whitmore's reasonable expression cracked just slightly at the edges. "You have 90 days to produce a sum that—" "Thank you for making the trip," Nathan said. He was done. Whitmore knew it. Marsh knew it. Charlotte held the gate of the yard open. The two men walked back to the carriage with the specific dignity of men who had not gotten what they came for. Nathan watched them go. Then something happened that he had not expected. Whitmore stopped at the carriage door. He turned around, and he looked not at Nathan, but at Charlotte. "Mrs. Cole," he said. His voice had changed. The reasonable tone was gone. What replaced it was quieter and considerably more dangerous. "You're a long way from Ohio." Charlotte said nothing. "It would be a shame," Whitmore continued, "if a woman who came all this way found herself with nothing to show for it. No land, no home." He let that sit for exactly 1 second. No stability. Nathan took 1 step forward. Charlotte put her hand on his arm, firm, a signal. "Don't." She looked at Whitmore. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. Her voice was perfectly level. "I have been in this valley for 2 months. In that time I have worked this land, managed these books, and learned every fence line on this property." She held his gaze without any visible effort. "I did not come 2,000 miles to be threatened on my own front yard by a man who has never once built anything he didn't buy." A pause. "We will have your money in 90 days. I suggest you spend that time finding something more productive to do with yourself." Whitmore stared at her. Then he got in the carriage. The carriage drove away. Nathan stood in the yard and waited until it was completely out of sight. Then he turned to Charlotte. She was still watching the road. Her jaw was set. Her hands were at her sides, but not relaxed, the hands of someone who had held themselves very tightly for the last 3 minutes and was only now beginning to release it. "Charlotte," he said. She turned. "Are you all right?" he asked. She took a breath. "He meant that," she said. "It wasn't a performance. He genuinely intends to take this land." "I know. He's going to look for other ways to apply pressure." Her eyes were very clear. "That comment about Ohio, that was a message. He's done research on me. He knows I have no family here. He's calculating that if things get hard enough, I'll leave. And if I leave—" She stopped. "If you leave, I have less reason to fight," Nathan finished. She met his eyes. "I'm not leaving," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said, and he meant it with a certainty that surprised him, not because she had said it, but because he had been watching her for 2 months and he knew the way. "You know the land. You've worked long enough that Charlotte Hayes did not make statements she didn't intend to keep." They went inside. Nathan went to the barn. He stood there alone for a while, the way he had stood there that first night she arrived, trying to figure out what was happening to his life. But it was different now. He wasn't unsettled by her anymore. He was unsettled by Whitmore, by the look on the man's face when he'd addressed Charlotte directly, by the specific calculation in it, the decision to go after her rather than him, because Whitmore had correctly identified that she was the spine of this operation, and if the spine could be frightened off, the rest would follow. What Whitmore had miscalculated was that Charlotte Hayes had never once been frightened off anything in her life. But Nathan also understood something else. Whitmore was not done. A man like that didn't drive out to a ranch and deliver threats at the gate and drive away finished. He was testing them, measuring their reaction, planning the next move. Nathan needed to be ready. He went back inside and told Charlotte exactly that. She was already at the table with paper and pencil. She had already started planning. The drought arrived the following week. Not in full force, not yet, but the signs were there for anyone who knew how to read the land. The creek level dropping earlier than it should. The color of the grass in the south field going to a shade that meant the roots were working harder than normal. The cattle at the water trough in the morning, with a particular edginess that animals get when the thing they need is becoming uncertain. Nathan had seen it before. In the bad summer of 1884, he had watched a drought turn a profitable ranch into a desperate one in 6 weeks. He told Charlotte that evening. She listened without interrupting. "How bad?" she asked when he finished. "I don't know yet. Could stop. Could get worse." "What does your gut say?" He respected that she asked it literally, not optimism, not pessimism, but genuine instinct from a man who had known this land for 9 years. "Worse," he said. She nodded once. Then we accelerate. If the creek drops much further, I know, the cattle need water. She was already thinking in multiple directions. What about Henderson? He's on our western border. If we're sharing grazing, he may have water access from the ridge creek that we don't. Nathan stopped. The Henderson property had a different water source, a ridge-fed creek that ran from the north rather than from the valley watershed. If the main valley creek was dropping, the Henderson creek might not be. I need to ride out there, he said. I'll come. Charlotte. I'll come, she said. Simply. The way she said everything, simply without making it a larger conflict than it needed to be. He went to get the horses. The Henderson meeting changed everything. Tom Henderson was a practical man, not much talk, a lot of work, straight dealings. He was also facing his own version of the same problem. But Tom Henderson had something Nathan didn't. An engineer's drawing from 3 years back showing that the aquifer under this section of the valley was significantly larger than anyone had developed. 2 potential deep well sites, both on the border between Nathan's land and Henderson's, that had never been drilled. Why not? Charlotte asked Tom Henderson directly. Tom shrugged. Cost, risk, couldn't do it alone. Charlotte looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Tom. What if we do it together? Nathan said. Tom leaned back in his chair. Split the cost, Charlotte continued. Split the water rights by acreage ratio, both operations benefit. She looked between the 2 men. The well survives a drought that takes the surface creek. Both ranches come through. Tom looked at his wife Mary in the corner. Mary looked at him. Something passed between them in the fluent language of people who have been married a long time. I'd need to see figures, Tom said. I brought figures, Charlotte said. She had. In her coat pocket on 2 folded sheets of paper, written the night before while Nathan was doing evening rounds. Tom Henderson looked at the figures for a long time. Where did you learn to put numbers together like this? He asked. My father, Charlotte said. Tom looked at Nathan with an expression that said quite clearly, this woman is the best thing that has happened to your ranch. Nathan kept his face composed. Barely. The well agreement was signed 3 days later. Nathan had never felt relief and terror arrive simultaneously the way they did when he pressed his name to that page. Relief because it was the right move. Terror because it required trusting another person with something essential. He told Charlotte that on the ride home. She was quiet for a moment. You've been trusting me for 2 months, she said. That's different, he said. How? Because with you, he stopped, tried again. It stopped feeling like trust at some point. It started feeling like just knowing, she said. He looked at her. Yes, he said. She looked at the road ahead, then back at him. Nathan, I need to tell you something. His chest tightened. He had no reason for it, just the tone. When I agreed to come here, she said, I told myself it was practical, that I was 25 and the farm was gone, and the sensible thing was to find a stable life. She paused. I read your letter 6 times, not because the language was complicated, because I was trying to figure out if you were a man worth building something with. And your conclusion? His voice was quieter than intended. That you might be, if you were honest, if you were what the letter sounded like underneath the practicality. She met his eyes. And you are. He held that. I was also afraid, she said. I want you to know that. Because I think you should know I'm not made of stone, Nathan, even though I sometimes sound like I might be. You don't, he said. I am afraid that we are going to build all of this, she gestured. Meaning the ranch, the well, the 90 days, all of it. And then something too large will happen, and I will not be enough to fix it. He looked at her. For the first time since he had known her, the confidence in her face had a gap in it. Just small. Just visible if you were watching for it. He had been watching for it without knowing. Charlotte, he said. Yes. I spent 10 years trying to be enough by myself, he said. I had everything in order, everything planned, everything under control. He held her gaze. and the house was cold for 10 years. She was very still. "You're not going to be enough by yourself either," he said. "Neither am I. That's the point." Her eyes were very bright suddenly. She turned her face just slightly sideways, composed herself in that fast, disciplined way she had. When she turned back, her voice was even again. "We should get the morning plan sorted," she said. "We should," he said. They sorted the morning plan. But something had shifted. Something that had been leaning toward an edge for 2 months had just stepped off it quietly, without ceremony, in a wagon on a Montana road, with the cold sky pressing down around them. It had no name yet, but both of them felt it, and neither of them looked away. Then Whitmore made his next move. Nathan found out about it not from Whitmore directly. That would have been too straightforward for a man like Marcus Whitmore, but from Cal, who was 63 and half-deaf and went into town for tobacco every Wednesday without fail, and came back with more information than a man his age had any right to carry. Cal came to Nathan on a Wednesday evening and took off his hat and said, "You need to hear something." Nathan waited. "Whitmore's been talking," Cal said, "to the feed supplier, to the timber merchant, to Dawson at the hardware." He turned his hat in his hands. "Telling them Cole Ranch is in financial trouble. Telling them the bank's called the note. Telling them you won't survive the winter." He paused. "Telling them it'd be a bad idea to extend credit to your operation going forward." Nathan went very still. "He's cutting off your supply lines," Cal said. "That's what he's doing. A man can fight a bank. A man can fight a drought. But a man can't run a ranch without feed and equipment and materials." Cal put his hat back on. "Whitmore knows that." Nathan said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "How many have listened to him?" "Dawson hasn't decided. The feed supplier's nervous." Cal met his eyes. "The timber merchant told Whitmore to mind his own business. But that's 1 out of 3. Nathan thanked him. He went inside. Charlotte was at the kitchen table, and she saw his face before he sat down. "Tell me," she said. He told her. She was silent for a full minute after he finished. The kind of silence she used when she was doing serious thinking, and didn't want to speak before the thinking was complete. Then she said, "He's not trying to wait us out anymore. He's trying to collapse us from the outside." "Yes," Nathan said. "If we can't get feed on credit, we have to pay cash. Cash we don't have enough of right now." She picked up her pencil. "Which means the cattle suffer, which means the spring sale suffers, which means the bank problem gets worse." She set the pencil down. "It's a chain." "I know what it is," Nathan said. "Then we break the first link," she said. "Tomorrow morning, I'm going to town." He looked at her. "Charlotte, I'm going to talk to the feed supplier and to Dawson," she said. Her voice had the specific quality it took on when she had already made a decision and was informing rather than discussing. "Not to argue with Whitmore's version of events. That would make us look frightened." She met Nathan's eyes. "I'm going to offer them something more valuable than Whitmore's warning." "What?" The truth presented better than he presented his lies. She picked up the pencil again. "And the kitchen garden contract with the church committee. Martha Dempsey's name on a document worth something to every merchant in this valley." Nathan stared at her. "You're going to use Martha Dempsey's social credibility to counteract Whitmore's financial pressure," he said. "Martha Dempsey has been organizing charitable food supply for this valley for 15 years, Charlotte said. "Every merchant in Silver Creek has benefited from her committee's purchasing. If I walk in with a signed supply agreement from that committee attached to Cole Ranch's name," she paused, "Whitmore's warnings start to sound considerably less credible." "When did you arrange a supply agreement with Martha Dempsey?" Nathan asked. "I haven't yet," Charlotte said. "I'm going to her house first thing in the morning before the merchants open." Nathan looked at the woman across his kitchen table. The woman who 2 months ago had walked off a train and told him he'd ordered the wrong woman, and thought about Whitmore sitting in his big house on his 800 acres, calculating how to destroy what Nathan had built. Whitmore had made one critical error. He had calculated against Nathan Cole alone. He had not calculated against Charlotte. "All right," Nathan said. "All right." She looked up. "Go," he said. "Take the wagon. Take whatever you need from the house accounts." He met her eyes. "And Charlotte?" "Yes." "Don't go easy on him," he said. Something fierce moved across her face. "I haven't gone easy on anyone in my life," she said. She was at Martha Dempsey's house by 7 the next morning. She was at the feed supplier by 8:30. She was at Dawson's Hardware by 9:15. She was back at the ranch by noon. Nathan came out of the barn when he heard the wagon. She climbed down and walked toward him, and her chin was up, and her stride was the stride of a woman who had gone somewhere with a purpose and returned having accomplished it. "Well," he said. "Martha Dempsey signed the committee supply agreement in 11 minutes, Charlotte said. She was furious about Whitmore. She said he was systematically weakening every independent operation in the valley, one at a time, quietly, turning the financial infrastructure against the men who didn't want to sell until they had no choice but to sell. It was patient, and it was ruthless, and it had probably been in motion for longer than anyone realized. "We need to tell Henderson," Nathan said. "I already sent word with the postwriter," Charlotte said. She went inside. Nathan stood on the porch for a moment. He thought about the letter he had written to the agency in Philadelphia, the careful word he had used. Quiet. The very specific, very limited thing he had asked for. He thought about what he had standing in his kitchen right now. He followed her inside. "Charlotte," he said. She turned from the stove. When Whitmore said what he said at the gate, Nathan said, "About you being a long way from Ohio." He paused. "Were you afraid?" She looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said, simply. "You didn't show it." "No," she said. "But I felt it." She held his gaze. "I was afraid because he was right that I'm a long way from Ohio, and he was right that I have no family here." A pause. "But he was wrong about what that means. He thought it made me vulnerable." She turned back to the stove. "It makes me someone who has already decided what she's staying for." Nathan said nothing, because there was nothing adequate to say. He sat at the kitchen table and thought about a man who had wanted a quiet life and gotten instead a woman who fought for his land harder than he'd known how to fight for it himself. Not because she had to, not because the arrangement required it, but because she had decided on some morning he hadn't been aware of that this was worth staying for. The storm came on a Friday. Nathan woke at 2 in the morning to a sound he knew. The barn. Something wrong. He was out of bed and pulling on his boots before he was fully awake through the kitchen and into the dark and the wind before he registered how bad it was. A dry, crashing wind with the force of something that had been building for a week and arrived all at once. He heard the barn crack, then the deep groan of structure giving way. He ran. The far wall had taken the wind broadside. The old section, the one he'd been meaning to reinforce for 2 seasons, had gone first. The roof was partially down. 2 support beams had given way. He could hear the cattle inside moving panicked, and the horses pulling at their ties, and one of them screaming the high, terrible scream of an animal that is genuinely afraid. He was through the barn door before he could think about it. He moved to the first horse tie, his hands working the knot, when a section of roof above him groaned, shifted, and the whole beam above the 3rd stall came down. It caught him on the shoulder and drove him sideways into the stall wall, and he went down on one knee, and the weight landed across the back of his left leg, and for one perfectly blank second, he could not move at all. He pushed. The angle was wrong. He pushed again. The barn door opened. Charlotte stood in the doorway with a lamp. She took in the entire situation in 1 second. "Nathan?" "Get out," he said. "The roof is unstable." She was already moving. She set the lamp on the nearest flat surface, grabbed the free end of the beam with both hands and pulled. The beam shifted. Not enough. "Again," Nathan said. They pulled together, 6 inches, then a foot. His leg came free. He stood. His shoulder screamed. He ignored it. "The horses first," he said. "I know," she said. They moved together. She took the nearest tie. He took the farthest. Working inward from the panicked animals, talking steady and low, the way you do when something frightened needs to trust you. 7 minutes. The roof groaned continuously above them. Once a secondary section came down in the back corner, and they both ducked without stopping. When all 3 horses were out, Nathan turned back for the cattle latch. "Nathan." "Go outside," he said. "I am not Charlotte." He turned to look at her. His shoulder was bleeding. His leg wasn't working at full capacity. The roof was going to come down in the next 10 minutes. "Please, go outside." She looked at him. She looked at the roof. Then she picked up the second cattle latch on the far wall. "You take the left side," she said. "I'll take the right. We'll be done in half the time." He stared at her. "Stop arguing and move," she said. He moved. 6 minutes later, they were both out of the barn, and the roof came down in full, with a sound like the world ending, and they stood in the cold wind watching it go. Then Nathan's left leg gave out properly, and he went down on one knee. Charlotte was beside him before he finished falling. "Your shoulder," she said. "The leg?" he said. "Both," she said. Her hands were already checking the shoulder fast and careful. "This is bleeding. We need to get inside." "The cattle. Hector will be here at first light. We have 3 hours. She looked him in the face close and directed the lamp between them. "Nathan, come inside." He looked at what was left of the barn. 9 years of work, his father's old tools, the structure he had built and repaired season by season. "It can be rebuilt," Charlotte said. He looked at her. "I know," he said. She pulled his arm across her shoulders to take the weight off his leg, and they walked back toward the house together slowly in the wind and the cold and the dark. The house was lit from inside because she had left the lamp burning in the kitchen. He saw it, the lamp in the window burning, waiting, and something in his chest that had been clenched for 10 years simply let go. Not all at once, not with drama, just quietly, like a door that had been shut a very long time finally opening. She sat him at the kitchen table and cleaned the shoulder and wrapped the leg and made coffee because it was 3 a.m, and they were both awake, and the barn was gone, and Whitmore was still out there, and the drought was still coming, and it was only October. Nathan looked at this woman in the lamplight of his kitchen and thought about the letter he had written, about the word quiet, about the very specific, very careful, very wrong idea he had carried into Silver Creek Station. "Charlotte," he said. She looked up from the bandage. "Thank you," he said. She held his gaze. "For the barn," he said. A pause. "And for the rest of it," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, her hands still on the bandage, very still. "You're welcome," she said. Simple, steady, real. The lamp held the kitchen in its circle of warmth. The wind worked at the walls outside. The Montana dark sat against the windows. And inside the house, Nathan Cole had built with his own hands 2 people who had come to this by accident, by a letter, by a train, by a perfectly wrong arrangement that turned out to be exactly right, sat across from each other in the small hours of the morning. And neither one of them was alone in it. Not anymore. Not for a very long time. The morning after the storm, Nathan Cole stood at the edge of where his barn used to be and counted what he had left. 3 horses. 109 head of cattle, all accounted for after Hector and Pete spent 2 hours in the pre-dawn dark rounding up the ones that had scattered. The house was untouched. The well project with Henderson was still intact on paper. The timber deal was still moving. The 90 days were still running. The barn was gone, and his shoulder hurt in a way that told him the cut had been deeper than Charlotte said, and she had downplayed it deliberately to keep him from arguing about going inside. He knew that now. He had figured it out sometime around 4 a.m. when the coffee had worn off and the full weight of the night settled across him. She had told him the cut was manageable. She had wrapped it clean and tight. She had said nothing that was untrue. She had simply arranged the truth in an order that got him off his feet and out of a collapsing structure. He was going to have to talk to her about that. He was also, if he was being completely honest with himself, and the morning after a barn collapsed on, you seemed like a reasonable time for complete honesty, grateful she'd done it. Hector appeared beside him. Full count, Hector said. 109. Good. Pete's leg is fine. He caught himself before the scattering got bad. A pause. Your wife found the 2 strays from the south corner in the dark. She and Cal had them back in the temporary pen before I finished the west side count. Nathan looked at him. In the dark, he said. Yes, sir. She took the lantern and Cal and she just went. Hector was quiet for a moment. Cal said she tracked them by the sound of their breathing, in the wind. Nathan said nothing. He looked at the collapsed barn. We can rebuild the framework in 3 weeks if we start now, Hector said. It's the roof supports that need the most work. The foundation is sound. I know. Nathan turned toward the house. Get Pete and Cal. We start today. In this cold? In this cold, Nathan said. He went inside. Charlotte was at the kitchen table. She had the ledger open and 3 sheets of paper in front of her, and a cup of coffee going cold at her elbow, which meant she had been working long enough to forget to drink it. She looked up when he came in. Her eyes went immediately to his shoulder. How bad is it this morning? She said. It's fine, he said. She looked at him the way she looked at him when he said something she didn't believe. It's manageable, he said. She stood up and came to him, which he had not expected, and put her hand on the shoulder over the bandage with a directness that was completely clinical and completely not clinical at the same time, and he stood very still. The bleeding stopped, she said. But you pulled it again this morning. I can feel the tension. I've been standing in the yard. You've been standing in the yard the way you stand in the yard when you're doing math in your head, she said. Shoulders up, jaw tight, weight on the right foot. She stepped back. Sit down and eat something. I need to... Nathan. Her voice was not loud. It was the quiet kind of firm that had more force in it than a shout. Sit down, eat something, then work. You are no good to this ranch if you push that shoulder into something permanent. He sat down. She put food in front of him. He ate. She sat across from him and went back to the papers, and the kitchen was full of the sounds of 2 people working in the same space, which Nathan had spent 10 years not knowing he was missing, and which was now the most natural sound in the world to him. What are you working on? He asked. The barn insurance, she said. He stopped eating. The barn insurance, he repeated. You have property insurance through a company in Billings. I found the policy in the file box in the second drawer. She looked up. Did you know there's a structure coverage provision that covers storm damage? He stared at her. He had taken the policy out 4 years ago because the bank required it as a condition of the land note. He had filed it and not thought about it since. I haven't made a claim, he said. I know. I'm looking at the language now to see what the process is. She turned one of the papers toward him. The coverage isn't for the full rebuild, but it's enough to cover materials. If we use your own labor and Henderson's crew in exchange for extending the grazing lease terms, we rebuild the barn at essentially 0 cash cost. She picked up her pencil. Which means the 90-day fund stays intact. Nathan looked at the paper. Then he looked at the woman across the table, who had at some point during the night after a storm destroyed his barn and pinned him under a falling beam, found his insurance policy, and read it, and built him a path out of the problem before he'd woken up to fully face it. You found the policy at 4 a.m, he said. 3:30, she said. I couldn't sleep. Charlotte. Yes. He didn't have a way to finish that sentence that was adequate, so he picked up the paper and read it. She was right. She was completely right. I'll write to the company today, he said. I already drafted the letter, she said. It's on the right side. You'll need to sign it. He looked at the right side of the table. There it was. 3 paragraphs clear and precise, dated that morning, describing the storm damage and citing the specific policy provision with the accuracy of a woman who had read legal language carefully, and not once, but twice. He picked it up, read it, set it down. "You wrote this at 3:30 in the morning," he said. "3:45, she said. "The first draft was messier." He looked at her for a long time. She was looking at the ledger again, pencil, moving the way she always looked when she was focused, and wasn't trying to make more of something than it needed to be. "I'll sign it," he said. "Good," she said. He signed it. The letter went out with the postwriter that afternoon, and Nathan spent the rest of the day directing the start of the barn rebuild, with his shoulders strapped tight and his jaw set, and every time Hector or Pete glanced at him, the way men glance at a man they're worried about, Nathan set his jaw a little tighter and kept moving. Charlotte brought lunch out to the worksite without being asked, which was the kind of thing she did so consistently now that Nathan had stopped noticing the individual instances and had simply started operating on the assumption that she would be there when it mattered. Which was, he thought, an enormous change from the man who had stood on a platform 6 weeks ago expecting a quiet stranger. What he was not prepared for was what happened on the 5th day after the storm. It came in the form of a visitor he should have anticipated and had not. The rider arrived mid-afternoon. A young man Nathan didn't recognize, well-dressed for the territory, carrying a leather satchel. He asked for Mr. Cole by name. Nathan came out from the rebuild site with sawdust on his coat and a hammer still in his hand. The young man introduced himself as an associate of Gerald Marsh's bank in Billings. Then he handed Nathan an envelope. Nathan read it. He read it twice, the way he had read the first letter. The way he now read things that required his full attention, because he had learned with Charlotte the cost of missing details. The bank was not accepting the 90-day timeline. More specifically, Marsh had found a clause in the original land note, a clause Nathan had not noticed, which meant the original lawyer who'd drawn the note 9 years ago had buried it, that allowed the bank to accelerate the full balance in the event of significant property damage. Significant property damage being defined as a loss of primary structure. Primary structure. The barn. The storm had destroyed the barn, which meant Marsh could call the entire remaining balance not in 90 days, but in 30. 30 days. Nathan stood in the yard with the letter in his hand and felt the specific cold of something that is not weather, but is indistinguishable from it. 30 days. The insurance claim hadn't been processed. The timber sale was 4 weeks from closing. The well wasn't finished. And the number required in 30 days was not a number that existed anywhere in the current account. The rider was still standing there. "Is there a response required?" Nathan asked. His voice was completely level. "Mr. Marsh asks only for acknowledgement of receipt, Mr. Cole." Nathan looked at the letter one more time. "Acknowledged," he said. The rider left. Nathan did not move for approximately 45 seconds. Then he put the letter in his coat pocket, went back to the rebuild site, picked up his hammer, and finished the section of framing he'd been working on. Hector watched him from the other side of the frame. Said nothing. Put a nail in the board he was holding and kept going. That was how ranch work was done. You kept going. An hour later, Charlotte came out to say supper was ready. She saw his face before she saw the letter. She had always been able to see his face. "What happened?" she said. "Come inside," he said. They went inside. He put the letter on the table. She read it. He watched her read it. Watched her go through it once fast, then back to 3 specific lines the way she did when she was confirming what she thought she'd understood. Her face did not change. Her breathing stayed even. She put the letter down. She looked at it for a moment. Then she said, "He's been waiting for this." "Yes," Nathan said. "The storm wasn't luck for him. He knew that clause was in your note. He knew if a storm came, or a fire, or anything that took out a main structure, he'd have grounds to accelerate," Nathan said. "Yes, I know." "Did you know about the clause?" she asked, not accusingly, a real question. "No." He sat down heavily. "The lawyer I used in 1880 was—" He stopped. He wasn't careful. "I was 25 and I needed the money and I didn't read it carefully enough." He looked at the table. "That was my mistake." Charlotte sat down across from him. All right, she said. 30 days, Charlotte. I heard. The timber sale doesn't close in 30 days. The insurance claim doesn't pay in 30 days. The well income doesn't start for months. He laid it out straight the way he always did when the truth was ugly. We are short. Significantly short. In 30 days. She was quiet. He waited. The waiting was hard. But he had learned to wait when Charlotte was thinking, because what came out of that thinking was always worth it, and interrupting it only made it take longer. My mother's inheritance, she said finally. Charlotte? The full amount this time, she said. Not partial. Absolutely not, he said. Nathan? No. He met her eyes. His voice had an edge he couldn't soften. I have already accepted a portion of your money, and I have written a repayment structure for it. This is not happening. I will not take everything you have. You're not taking it, she said. I'm giving it. There is no difference. There is every difference, she said, and the steadiness in her voice broke just slightly in the specific way of someone who is not performing emotion, but controlling real emotion, which he could recognize now. Nathan, do you understand what happens if we lose this land? I lose the ranch, he said. We, she said sharply. We lose the ranch. I live here. I work here. I have given months of my life and my father's remedies and my mother's savings and every skill my family spent a generation teaching me to this place. Her voice was very controlled and very full at the same time. This is not your disaster to handle alone. This is our disaster. And I am telling you that I want to use my money to save our home. And you do not get to refuse that on the grounds of pride. The silence after that was very long. Nathan looked at his hands on the table. He thought about pride, about the specific architecture of it, about how he had spent 10 years calling it independence and self-reliance and appropriate caution, and how Charlotte, in the course of one conversation, had just called it exactly what it was. It's everything you have, he said. His voice was quieter now. I know what it is, she said. I know exactly what it is. It's what my mother left me, and it has been sitting in a bank in Cincinnati and doing nothing. She leaned forward slightly. Nathan, look at me. He looked at her. I would rather it do something, she said. I would rather it save this ranch. I would rather it stay in this valley, in this soil, in these fences, in this house. She stopped herself. In this life. A pause. Our life. He held her gaze. The lamp between them was steady. He was a man who had built his entire adult existence on the principle that needing someone was the first step toward losing everything. That depending on another person was a structural weakness. That the only thing you could trust completely was land and labor and yourself. He looked at Charlotte Hayes. He thought about the platform at Silver Creek Station, about the green dress and the unsettling smile and the words, I'm afraid you may have ordered the wrong woman. He thought about 5:22 every morning. He thought about the barn, about a beam across his leg, about hands pulling the weight off him in the dark. He thought about the word we, about when it had stopped sounding like an arrangement and started sounding like a fact. All right, he said. Charlotte sat back. She looked at him carefully. All right. On one condition, he said. She waited. We have this written properly, he said. Documented, with a full repayment schedule at fair interest. Your money is not a gift. It is a loan from you to this ranch with terms. He held her gaze. When the timber sale closes and the insurance pays out, you are repaid first, before anything else. Charlotte looked at him. You're making it a business arrangement, she said. I'm making sure you are protected, he said, regardless of what happens. Something moved across her face. What do you mean, regardless of what happens? She said carefully. He met her eyes. I mean that if things go wrong, if the 30 days somehow go wrong, your money is documented as a debt of the ranch, not a personal loss. You would have standing to... Stop, she said. He stopped. Her expression had changed completely. You're protecting me, she said. In case you lose, I'm being practical. "You're protecting me," she said again. Not with anger. With something else entirely. "You're sitting here figuring out how to make sure I don't suffer for trusting you." She looked at him like he was something she was seeing newly. "Nathan Cole." He said nothing. "You are—" She stopped herself. Took a breath. "Write the terms," she said. "Whatever terms you think are right. I'll sign them." "Charlotte, write the terms," she said again. Her voice had a quality in it he hadn't heard before, warm and certain and private. "And then we'll sort out Whitmore and Marsh together." He wrote the terms that evening. She signed them. And the following morning, Charlotte wrote to the bank in Cincinnati, and Nathan sat down and wrote 3 letters of his own. The first was to Tom Henderson, proposing an extension of the grazing lease terms in exchange for Henderson crew labor on the barn, formalizing what they'd discussed before the storm. The second was to his timber buyer, asking for a partial advance on the timber sale, not the full amount, just enough to demonstrate good faith, and add to the fund in exchange for a slight reduction in the overall price. The third was to Gerald Marsh. This one he wrote with Charlotte sitting across the table, and she read it when he was finished, and suggested 4 changes, and 2 of them he took immediately. And one of them he argued about for 15 minutes before she proved she was right, and he took it. And the 4th she withdrew when she saw his reasoning. The letter said this, that Nathan Cole was fully aware of the acceleration clause, that he was in the process of assembling the full remaining balance through a combination of personal funds, documented loans, and pending asset liquidations, and that he would present payment in full on day 28 of the 30-day window. Not on day 30. Day 28. Charlotte had insisted on day 28. Why, he'd asked. Because day 30 looks desperate, she said. Day 28 looks organized. It tells Marsh and Whitmore that you were never as cornered as they thought you were. He had looked at her. Even if we were, he said. Especially then, she said. He sent the letter. The days that followed were the hardest kind, the kind where the work is real and the outcome is not yet certain, and you simply have to keep moving and trust the ground under your feet to hold. The Henderson extension was agreed to in 4 days. The timber advance came through in 8. Not as much as they'd hoped, but enough. Charlotte's wire transfer from Cincinnati arrived on day 11. Nathan went to the bank in Silver Creek to receive it, and the clerk, a young man who had never once had reason to think about Nathan Cole's domestic arrangements, watched the transaction with the slightly dazed expression of someone watching a larger sum of money than he normally handled move in a single afternoon. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Cole?" the clerk said. "No," Nathan said. He put the receipt in his coat pocket beside the letter from Marsh. "That will do." He rode back to the ranch. Charlotte was working the kitchen garden, the winter preparation, turning the soil for next spring, the practical eternal optimism of someone who plants things because they intend to be there for the harvest. She was kneeling in the cold dirt hands working, and she looked up when she heard him come into the yard. She read his face. "It came through," she said. "It came through." She let out a breath, just one, controlled. And then she stood up and brushed the dirt from her hands and said, "Good." "Charlotte," he said. She looked at him. "I need to say something," he said. "All right," she said. He got off the horse, tied it, stood in the yard with the winter light cold and clear around them, and tried to find words for something he had been working up to for weeks without knowing it. "When I sent that letter," he said, "the one to the agency, I told myself I was being practical, that I knew what I needed and I was going about getting it sensibly." He met her eyes. "I was a fool." She started to say something. "Not done," he said. She closed her mouth. "I thought I needed quiet," he said. "I thought what I was missing was peace and order and a house that ran smoothly. I thought if I could just get those things managed, everything else would hold." He looked at the ground for a moment, then back at her. "But that's not what was wrong with my life. The house ran fine. The ranch ran fine. Everything was managed." A pause. It was empty. Charlotte was very still. "Not the rooms," he said. "I don't mean the rooms. I mean—" He stopped. I sat in this valley for 10 years, and I had everything organized, and I had nothing to organize it for. And I told myself I was fine with that, because depending on someone was the one thing that could take away everything else. He looked at her. And then you stepped off that train and told me I'd ordered the wrong woman. Her eyes were very bright. And you were wrong, he said. She blinked. You were wrong, he said again. I ordered exactly right. I just didn't know what I was ordering. Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at her hands, then back at him. Nathan Cole, she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. That is the most words I have ever heard you say in a single speech. He looked at her. Was it enough? She crossed the yard to him. She stopped right in front of him, the way she had on the platform the first day, close and direct, and without any performance. It was enough, she said quietly. He put his hand on the side of her face. She let him, and the Montana wind moved across the yard, and neither of them said anything for a while, which was the kind of quiet that Nathan Cole had been chasing for 10 years without knowing. It wasn't silence he wanted. It was this, the specific quiet of a person who belongs beside you. The kind that you could only find if you stopped being afraid of everything that came with it. The timber sale closed on day 17. Combined with the partial advance, Charlotte's inheritance, the insurance advance that had come through faster than expected, and the cattle sale proceeds they had been protecting for months, Nathan had the full balance. On day 28 he rode to Billings with Hector beside him, and he walked into Gerald Marsh's bank, and he paid every cent. He did not speak to Marsh beyond what the transaction required. He did not speak to Whitmore at all, though Whitmore's name appeared twice in the bank's documentation as a party of interest, which told Nathan exactly how organized the arrangement between them had been. He took his clear deed. He rode home. When he came through the door, Charlotte was at the stove, and she turned when she heard him, and she looked at his face, and she already knew. Done, he said. She turned back to the stove. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Supper's almost ready. He hung up his coat. Charlotte, he said. Yes. The land is clear, he said. Fully mine. She looked over her shoulder at him. Ours, she said. He held that word. Let it sit in his chest where the old, tight, cold thing used to live. Ours, he said. She turned back to the stove, and he sat down at the kitchen table, and outside the Montana sky was going dark, in the way it went dark in winter, fast and purple, and full of stars you couldn't see yet, but knew were coming. The lamp was already lit on the table. She had lit it before he got home. She always did. And Nathan Cole, the man who had wanted a quiet bride, who had wanted peace and order, and a life with no sharp edges, who had spent a decade building walls out of silence and calling it wisdom, sat in the warm kitchen of the house he had built, and felt something so far from empty that he couldn't find a word adequate to it. He thought about trying. Then he decided the feeling was better than any word he had for it. And he waited for supper. And she brought it to the table, and they ate. The morning after the land note was paid, Nathan Cole stood in the yard and felt the specific weight of something that had been lifted. Not the financial weight, though, that was real enough. Something older than that. Something he had been carrying since long before Gerald Marsh had ever walked through his door with a briefcase and a practiced expression of regret. He had built this land to prove something. To himself, mostly. That a man who had lost everyone he depended on could stand on his own ground and need no one and be fine. That independence was the same thing as strength. That a quiet house and a clear deed were the same thing as a life well lived. He had been wrong about all of it. But it had taken Charlotte Hayes stepping off a train in a green dress to show him exactly how wrong and exactly what the right version looked like, and he was still, even now 4 months in, not entirely done being surprised by it. Charlotte came out of the house with coffee. She handed him a cup without a word, stood beside him, looked at the same yard he was looking at. Done, he said. Done, she agreed. They drank their coffee. After a while, she said, Whitmore will find something else. I know, Men like him always do. I know that too. He looked at her. But he'll find something else on a ranch that's fully paid for and has a working deep well and a supply agreement with Martha Dempsey's church committee. That's a different problem for him than the one he started with. Charlotte considered this. That's a good point. I have them occasionally. She looked at him sideways. He kept his face composed. She almost smiled. Occasionally, she said. They went inside. The winter that followed was the hardest Silver Creek Valley had seen in 6 years. Nathan knew it the way he knew most things about this land, not from a thermometer, but from the way the cold settled into the ground and stayed there, and the way the cattle stood in the mornings with their bodies turned against the wind without being driven to it. He had been reading this land for 9 years. This winter, for the first time, he wasn't reading it alone. Charlotte was beside him in the mornings when he checked the weather. She had started doing it without any announcement, simply appearing at his shoulder in the early dark, coffee in hand, looking at the same sky and drawing her own conclusions. They compared notes. Sometimes they agreed. Twice in December they disagreed, and once she was right, and once he was, and neither made more of either outcome than it deserved. He did not examine this too closely. He simply let it be true. January came in brutal and stayed that way. The well project with Henderson had finished in late November, just before the ground froze hard enough to make digging impossible. The new deep well had come in stronger than the engineer's drawing had suggested. The water situation was stable for both ranches, regardless of what the surface creek did, which turned out to matter considerably when February arrived and the creek froze solid for 3 weeks. Other ranches were not so fortunate. Nathan heard about the Parsons place losing 8 head in the hard freeze. He heard about the Whitfield family running dangerously low on feed. He heard about old Cravens, who had been ranching this valley since before Nathan was born, sitting on a shortage that was going to become a crisis by month's end. He told Charlotte each thing as he heard it. She listened without commenting until he was done. Then she said, "What do we have to spare?" They went through the inventory together side by side, honest about the numbers, clear about what was possible, never once pretending the situation was better or worse than it was. They sent feed to the Whitfield family. Nathan arranged it quietly through Hector. Charlotte packed 2 crates of preserved food and sent them with the wagon without telling anyone. Nathan found out from Pete. He said nothing to Charlotte, but that evening at supper, he reached across the table and put his hand over hers for a moment, brief and real, and she looked up from her food and understood exactly what he meant. She turned her hand over under his. They went back to eating. That was February. In March, the winter broke, the way Montana winters broke, not gradually, but all at once, as though the cold had decided it was done and departed. The creek thawed. The ground softened. The cattle moved with the specific looseness of animals that have survived something hard and feel the ease returning. Charlotte came out and stood beside Nathan on the first genuinely warm morning. "Spring," she said. "Spring," he agreed. She looked at the kitchen garden plot, the one she'd started her first week, which had produced well in the fall, and was now waiting for the season to allow it again. "Bigger this year," she said. "How much bigger?" "Enough to supply the church committee's fall distribution properly." She turned to look at him. "Martha Dempsey came to me in January." Nathan raised his eyebrows. "She asked for my advice on the garden planning for the valley's charitable food supply." Perfectly even, perfectly composed. "She said she'd heard our garden produced well last fall." "Martha Dempsey asked you," Nathan said. "The very same." The small smile. "I may have suggested that a coordinated effort across several ranch gardens would produce more than any single operation could." "You organized her," Nathan said. "I gave her an idea," Charlotte said. "She organized herself. She's actually quite capable when she's pointed in a useful direction." Nathan looked at this woman who had handled Martha Dempsey in 40 minutes on day 1, with a cake and a kitchen garden, and had now arrived 7 months later at a place where Martha Dempsey was asking Charlotte Cole for advice. He thought about the distance between those 2 points and how Charlotte had covered it so quietly that most people in the valley hadn't even seen it happening. "You are something else," he said. "I'm practical," she said. "That's not what I said." She looked at him. He looked back. The morning held them both in it, the first warm air of the new season moving between them. "Nathan," she said, different tone, deliberate in the specific way of someone who has chosen their moment carefully. His attention sharpened. "What is it?" She held his gaze. "I'm going to have a child," she said. He did not speak. He stood in the yard in the first morning of spring, and the world around him did not change. The sky was the same sky, the fields were the same fields, and everything was completely different. "When?" he said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. "October," she said. "If I've read it right. And I believe I have." October. He thought about everything that word contained now, the barn, the beam, the letter from Marsh Day, 28, the yard where she had said hours and meant it. "Are you?" he started. "I'm well," she said. "I've been well. I felt it since January, and I wanted to be certain before I told you." "January," he said. "Charlotte, it's March." "I know when it is," she said. "I wanted to be certain." 2 months. She had carried this through the worst of the winter, through every hard morning and late night and difficult decision, and had said nothing until she was sure. Because that was Charlotte. "Are you frightened?" he asked. She considered it honestly. "A little," she said. "Are you?" "Yes," he said immediately. She looked mildly surprised he'd said it so fast. "Good," she said. "Then we're both honest about it." He moved toward her, stopped directly in front of her, put both hands on the sides of her face. "Charlotte," he said. "Yes," she said. "Thank you," he said. She put her hands over his. "You keep thanking me," she said softly. "You're going to have to find a different word eventually." "I'll work on it," he said. She laughed. The real kind, warm and unguarded, and entirely hers. He stood in the first morning of spring and held her face and felt the specific weight of a future that was no longer just a financial projection or a land note or a 90-day problem. It was a life. Theirs. The news moved through Silver Creek Valley faster than anyone sent it. Charlotte's pregnancy was known at the general store before she'd finished her next trip to town. Nathan told Charlotte. She seemed unsurprised. "Martha Dempsey will organize something," Charlotte said. "Let her." "You're not bothered." "I'm not bothered by people celebrating something good." She looked at him. "Are you?" He thought about it. He had spent 10 years avoiding exactly this, the social entanglement of a valley that knew your business. "No," he said. He meant it. That surprised him more than anything. The summer came in warm and long and productive. The kitchen garden became everything Charlotte had planned it to be. The cattle operation found its stride. The well with Henderson was performing beyond their best projection. And then, on a Tuesday morning in late August, everything nearly came apart. Nathan was in town at the feed supplier when he ran into Gerald Marsh. Not a planned meeting. Marsh was passing through on territory business, or so he said, and they encountered each other on the main street of Silver Creek, with 6 feet of dirt road between them, and no carriage for either man to retreat too quickly. Marsh looked at Nathan with the expression of a man who has lost a specific battle and is still working out how he feels about it. "Cole," he said. "Marsh," Nathan said. A pause. "I heard you paid the note," Marsh said. "You processed the payment yourself," Nathan said. "You know I paid it." Marsh looked at his hat in his hands. Something in the gesture was almost uncomfortable, almost human. "I want you to know," he said, "that the acceleration clause was not my suggestion. The terms were—" He stopped. "Whitmore's," Nathan said. Marsh said nothing, which was the same as saying yes. Nathan looked at this small man with his carefully managed hair and his expression of practiced reasonableness and felt something that was not quite anger and not quite pity, but somewhere between the two. "Marsh," he said. The banker looked up. The next man Whitmore sends you after. Nathan said quietly, "Think about what it cost him to get what he wanted from you." He walked back to his wagon. He was halfway home when a rider came up fast behind him on the road. He recognized the horse before he recognized the rider. Henderson's gray mare. Tom Henderson himself, pushing the horse harder than Tom Henderson typically pushed anything. Nathan pulled up. Tom reined in beside him, breathing hard from the ride. "I've been looking for you," he said. "What happened?" Tom looked at him with an expression Nathan had never seen on that particular face. "Whitmore went to the county land office this morning," Tom said. "Filed a formal complaint about the well agreement, claiming the water rights documentation was improperly recorded." He paused. "If the county upholds it, the well agreement gets voided. Both our operations lose the water access." Nathan felt the ground shift. "On what grounds?" he said. "He's arguing the acreage ratio calculation was filed under the wrong parcel designation. A technicality." Tom's jaw was tight. "But a valid one according to the clerk. We have 14 days to respond with corrected documentation, or the agreement is suspended pending review." 14 days. Nathan thought about October, about Charlotte, about what the next 2 months required. Not stress, not crisis, not another fight on another front. "Who drew up the original documentation?" Nathan asked. "Young Pierce at the land office," Tom said. "He made an error in the parcel number. Whitmore found it." He shook his head. "The man has been through every public record in this county looking for something to use." Nathan looked at the road ahead. He thought about Whitmore's calculation patient, methodical, relentless. The credit lines, the bank, the barn, and now this. Going after the well because the well was the one thing that had made both ranches genuinely drought-proof, genuinely independent. Take the well, and the drought threat came back. Take the drought threat, and the financial pressure returned. Return the financial pressure, and "I need a lawyer," Nathan said. "I know a man in Billings," Tom said. "Good one, not cheap. How fast can he move?" "If we ride tomorrow, we can be in Billings by Thursday. File a corrected response by Friday." Tom looked at him. "It'll cost us." "Less than losing the water rights," Nathan said. "Considerably." Tom agreed. Nathan turned the wagon around. He rode home fast. Charlotte was in the kitchen garden when he came into the yard. She stood up when she saw his face. He told her everything before he got off the wagon. She listened standing in the garden dirt, hands at her sides not interrupting once. When he finished, she was quiet for 5 full seconds. Then, "Go to Billings, take Tom, get the lawyer." "Charlotte, you're 7 months. I am 7 months along, and I have been managing this ranch and my own health for 7 months without incident," she said firmly. "Hector is here. Mary Henderson is 10 minutes away. I am not fragile, and this is not negotiable." She held his gaze. "Go fix the well. Come back when it's done." He looked at her. "You're certain," he said. "Nathan." She looked at him with that direct, clear, seeing-through-him expression. "Go." He went. He and Tom Henderson rode to Billings. The lawyer, a sharp, fast-talking man named Aldrich, who had clearly dealt with men like Whitmore before, looked at the documentation, found the error, drafted the corrected filing, and had it at the county land office in Silver Creek by Friday afternoon. Whitmore's complaint was reviewed and denied on the following Monday. The well agreement stood. Nathan was back at the ranch by Tuesday evening. Charlotte met him in the yard. She looked at his face. She read it the way she read everything about him now, immediately, accurately, without effort. "Done?" she said. "Done," he said. She exhaled once. Then, "Good. Come inside. Supper's been waiting 40 minutes." He climbed down from the horse. "Is that all you're going to say?" he said. She turned at the porch steps. "What else would you like me to say?" He looked at her, 7 months along, standing straight, completely composed, who had sent him to Billings without hesitation and managed everything in his absence without drama, and was now mildly impatient about the supper temperature. "Nothing," he said. "That covers it." She went inside. He followed. The child came in early October. Not the expected date, but close. Charlotte said she had anticipated the early arrival, something she had recognized from her mother's stories. She told Nathan the morning it started calmly while he was having coffee. "Today," she said. He was on his feet before the word finished. "Don't panic," she said. "I'm not panicking," he said, panicking. "Nathan. I'm going to ride for Mrs. Henderson." "Yes, do that. But finish your coffee first. It will be hours and you'll need to be useful later, not exhausted now." He drank the coffee. He rode for Mary Henderson. He spent 8 of the longest hours of his life doing precisely what Mary Henderson told him, which was mostly staying in the kitchen and being useful in ways that did not involve being in the room where the useful things were happening. Pete and Cal arrived at some point, drawn by some ranching community instinct. Hector was already there. The 4 of them sat in the kitchen and said almost nothing, which was exactly right. Nathan sat with them and did not think about the barn, did not think about Whitmore, did not think about the land note, or the 90 days, or the well, or any of the structures and battles and negotiations that had defined the past year. He thought about a platform at Silver Creek Station, about a green dress and a suitcase carried without help, and a smile that was the beginning of the entire rest of his life. Then Mary Henderson opened the kitchen door. She looked at Nathan. "You have a daughter," she said. The kitchen went completely silent. Pete made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Cal took off his hat. Hector looked at Nathan with an expression Nathan had never seen on that face before, open and simple and real. Nathan walked down the hall. He stopped in the doorway. Charlotte was in the bed, looking like a woman who had done something very hard and very real, and was not performing anything at all. She was holding a small bundled weight against her, and she looked up when Nathan came in. Her face had nothing held back in it. Not one thing. He crossed the room, sat on the edge of the bed. She turned the bundle toward him. He looked at his daughter, small, red-faced, entirely furiously alive. Eyes squeezed shut like someone who had opinions about the brightness of the world and was not yet ready to share them. "She has your jaw," Charlotte said. Her voice was rough and warm. "She's 2 hours old," Nathan said. "She has your jaw," Charlotte said again. Certain. The way she said things she was sure of. "What do we call her?" he said. Charlotte had thought about this. He could see it measured honest without sentimentality, but not without feeling. "Margaret," Charlotte said. "After my mother, if you're willing." "Margaret," Nathan said. He tried it against the walls of the house he had built. "Margaret Cole," he said. Something in his chest, permanent and complete, like something that had been waiting a long time to arrive, moved through him all at once. "Yes," he said. Charlotte leaned her head back against the pillow. Already exhausted in the absolute way of someone who has used everything they had. "Nathan," she said. "Yes." "She is going to be very loud," Charlotte said. Her eyes were closing. "She has been announcing herself since 4 this morning." "Takes after her mother," Nathan said. Charlotte's mouth curved. Eyes stayed closed. "Don't start," she said. He sat on the edge of the bed and held his daughter and watched his wife sleep. The lamp was burning in the window. She had lit it before the day got difficult. She always prepared for what was coming. Years later, when people asked Nathan Cole about his ranch, he would pause before answering. He would say Charlotte. And when they pressed for more, he would tell them about a letter he had written to an agency in Philadelphia in the spring of 1889. About the specific word he had used, quiet. About standing on a platform with his arms folded and his hat pulled low and his entire carefully managed life waiting for one type of woman to arrive. And about what stepped off that train instead. Margaret Cole grew up on that ranch. She had her father's jaw and her mother's eyes, and the particular quality both parents shared, the refusal to leave anything half done. The directness that came not from arrogance, but from respect. The belief that a problem could always be solved if you were honest about its shape. She learned to rebraid rope at 6 without looking at her hands. She learned accounts at 9. She learned to read the weather at 12 by standing beside her father in the yard before sunrise and comparing what she saw against what he saw until she understood how the land spoke to people who paid attention. Charlotte taught her that no position was permanent unless you held it with both hands and your full attention. Nathan taught her that the only thing more important than knowing what you wanted was being honest about what you needed. She grew up in a house with a lamp always burning in the kitchen window, and 2 cups on the table every morning at 5:22, and the sound of her parents working the same problems from opposite sides of a table and finding the answer in the middle. She grew up knowing what a real partnership looked like. She never mistook it for anything else. On the evening of Nathan and Charlotte's 25th anniversary, Margaret stood beside her father on the porch and watched her mother across the yard accepting a small gift from Martha Dempsey, the two of them talking like the old friends they had become. "She changed everything," Margaret said, meaning her mother, meaning the valley, meaning him. Nathan looked at his wife across the yard. Charlotte at 50 carried herself the same way she had at 25 straight, certain, fully present. No performance, no apology, no version of smaller that anyone had ever managed to convince her to become. She looked up and caught his eye across the distance. She smiled. The real one. The one he had spent 25 years learning and still was not done with. "You asked for a quiet wife," Margaret said. Nathan looked at the ranch, the house, the barn, the garden, the land that was theirs, and had been theirs, and would be after them. He looked at 25 years. He looked at a platform in September 1889, and a green dress and a suitcase carried without help, and a sentence that had changed the course of everything. "I did," he said. "And what did you get?" Margaret asked. He looked at his wife. He felt the same thing he had felt in the kitchen on the night she first brought him a second cup of coffee and sat across the table and made his ledger. Make sense that particular fullness, that complete and permanent thing that lived in his chest where the cold used to be. "Everything," he said. Not a quiet life, not a silent house, not peace in the way he had misunderstood the word for most of his life, but the real thing. The life that became worth having because someone stubborn and honest and entirely herself had stepped off a train in a green dress and refused from the very first moment to be anything less than exactly who she was. The man who wanted a quiet bride found his perfect match. And she was the loudest, truest, most necessary thing that had ever walked into his carefully controlled, deliberately silent, desperately waiting life.